I'd like to give you a perspective from where I sit within our organisation at PPD, which I expect is a similar view to many of you hold within the CRO space. I don't necessarily expect that what I'll say will shock, amaze or surprise any of you, but I do hope to encourage you all to think carefully about the unprecedented opportunities that now exist within our industry to acquire, aggregate, analyse and develop real-time insights on our data in a more real-time fashion, and the importance of that to where the industry needs to go, and specifically to partnerships such as those between our organisations. The term transparency means many different things to different people across our industry, and the context is important to think about. The dictionary definition is openness, communication and accountability, and that very much applies to the discussion we heard in the panel, the first panel this morning, where transparency was talking about the openness and communication with the public, with our patients, and even with our competitors. Before we move to that sort of openness outside our organisations and outside clinical development, I'm trying to look at how we generate a much more focused transparency within clinical development, within our organisations and between our organisations. I think the principles of what we can achieve internally will translate very well to what we want to achieve externally, so I hope you'll bear with me when I use transparency in a different context for the rest of the presentation than you heard on the panel this morning. So the context I'm going to be talking about is transparency in our clinical development teams, across all the operations, within the different functional expertise and around our regions of the world. And the concept is such that it's easy for project team members to see what the status of our projects are, to review the areas of concern or success, and to move that project forward or to design the next project with success based on focused transparency. Obviously, in that context, the more details that are available, the more data, the more insights that are available to our teams, the more they can drive the right decisions, take the right actions, and progress successfully. However, that transparency and those details can be overwhelming also, and crippling if not well managed. So our experience at PPD shows us that transparency can be focused, can be based on the unique needs of team members within our project trials, and can be specific to their roles and responsibilities, and that type of focused transparency is what will be the foundation for, we hope, significant progression in clinical development and the revolution we hope we will see going forward. Our experience really can be summarised in an evolution. There's 5 steps that we've progressed through so far. I want to share that experience, and I want to tell you about how I think that's the foundation for continued focused transparency and innovation going forward. So for the first and last time probably in my career, I share the stage with Bill Gates. You've heard lots of quotes from this gentleman before, but this was a recent one from him that kind of caught my eye, given the innovation and development that he's witnessed in his career. He's talking about the current term and the future here and saying that never has innovation offered more promise than it does at this time. And I think, you know, that is witnessed by some of the comments we've already discussed earlier in the panel, that, you know, we see that exponential growth in technology innovation in our personal life. It hasn't necessarily invaded our professional lives to the same extent, but mobile technology is beyond, and the engagement levels that it has with society is beyond anything that I imagined previously, and I think that most people did. And now that those mobile tech industry focus has turned its attention to healthcare, and we see significant investments from the likes of Microsoft, but also Google and Apple and Samsung, amongst many other lesser known companies, we can recognize that we're all going to be, they're all going to be competing for our interest as consumers, and then probably subsequently as professionals, in connecting our phones, connecting our new watches, connecting our wristbands to their investments in cloud-based data repositories, and to quantify that health data that can be achieved through non-invasive technologies without the intervention or without the involvement of the traditional healthcare system. And whilst arguments will rage, and we already heard a little bit of it this morning, about whether those types of consumer products are really fit for purpose in clinical development, we also can recognise there's a lot of investment going on within other companies for medical devices that will meet or do meet our regulatory requirements. And those innovations in both those spaces, I think, will provide a situation of unprecedented promise for us for the type of patient engagement with data collection that we in clinical development can benefit from. However, there's probably another argument that that type of promise is a little out of reach for us. We all know and comment on the conservative nature of our industry and how we lag behind others in grabbing hold of new innovation and benefiting from it. So, and if we look at it, you know, our promise so far is only half fulfilled. We, in clinical development, remain in a world where disparate systems exist within and between our organizations, where data standardization doesn't necessarily exist, or where it has, we've been slow to adopt to it, and where functional information that was built up in systems that benefited those silos is now not fit for purpose in helping move clinical development forward. So that's not very optimistic, but I was one of the guys that raised my hand earlier to say I'm an optimistic person. So what's that optimism based on? I see a number of change drivers that exist within our organization that haven't been there necessarily as strongly before in the past. Our ability to drive increased transparency, I think, has been fueled by these types of changes that have taken place not only within our industry, but also in the other industries that serve us on a day-to-day basis. So firstly, we've increased our capabilities in the continual process improvement space, both technology and innovation and also process improvement. That's allowed us to invest in enterprise solutions with a greater confidence that we can obtain the internal and external support to get the return on that type of investment. Within our organizations or out with them and our vendors, we see technology skill sets that allow for robust system integration, for compatibility to be developed across platforms, and that there's significant vendors with experience within our space to support organizations. Thirdly, we have industry collaboration, finally, on standards of data. If we look at CDISC, it was another thing that's taken a long time to become standard, but I think we're there. I'd be struggling to find somebody in the audience today whose organization has not adopted that industry standard for safety and demography data. And now we have, excitingly, the CFAST initiative, which is a collaboration between CDISC, the regulators, Trancelerate, and ACRO, the Association of CROs, to develop similar sort of industry standards for common efficacy data domains in the therapeutic areas that we commonly research. And we've also seen an increased focus within the industry on the alignment of people, processes, and systems to drive most efficiency in what we do, either within organizations or in the expectations that partners have of CROs for the highest efficiency and quality in deliverable. And there's also been enabled by the strong partnerships that are developing through our organizations and encouraged with conferences such as this to develop and maintain lasting relationships that are built on best practice, not just within an organization and their deliverables, but also in the collaborations between the organizations. And those provide a foundation where I think change will be more successful. Within our organization, we've taken advantage of those change drivers, and I think most leading CROs have done something very similar. We've recognized the need for investment in developing and implementing technology and process solutions that deliver greater transparency for our project teams. And the core elements of that progress have been made and include significant investments in the development of central data repositories based on these industry standards, where we are minimizing the footprint for the data that we're interested to access and putting that in a central place, a standard place for teams to liaise with. We've connected that with an automated real-time data feeds from our core data sources, such as EDC, IVRS, central labs, that allow that data to be pulled into that transparent, visible place on a rapid basis in real time throughout the project. We've also gained the capability to acquire external data either within the trial setting or in a legacy setting and bring that to the central location. And plus, very importantly, the great development we've seen in user-friendly, easy access data visualization and business analytics tools. Softwares that are scalable to be deployed at an enterprise-wide fashion. They're very accessible to users, very intuitive, little training required, and allow us to move from a situation where questions had to be directed to analysts or statisticians and now can be self-served with good dashboard availability that allows people to interrogate, develop their own questions and look for their own answers. But importantly, we've not just focused on developing that type of technology, we also recognize that to be successful, we've had to focus very much on the change management to make sure we have an end-to-end solution that can be successful, that we're looking at the people, the roles, the processes involved, and how we align as an organization to drive efficiency with these new tools. And that's very important. That's been one of the main lessons we've learned at PPD as we've gone through this journey, is that during our pilot phases, we saw some real great situations where teams were early adopters that recognized the benefit, that adjusted their working practices and benefited from the transparency and moving their projects forward very quickly. Conversely, we saw some other teams struggle, and when we looked at the root cause for that, we identified that there was teams who were adding in this new capability into their existing workflow, and resulted in a situation where they had multiple data access, multiple reporting capabilities, and got confused in what they were looking at in terms of real-time data versus the legacy periodic reporting. So that learning re-energized us. Our focus was for more than just a technology solution. We needed to have an integrated package. And in order to be successful in that environment, you need to invest heavily in ensuring the awareness and focus of the business case to make sure across your functions and your regions, your countries, that people understand what you're trying to obtain, what you're trying to achieve, what success will look like, what training is available, how their role changes, what support mechanisms they have, who the experts are, how they can turn to that, and therefore take advantage of the innovations that have been developed. And part of that is also recognizing that within all of our organizations, we probably work in a matrix environment, or many of them at least, where in order to be successful, we're also seeing not only a project oversight that's very much aligned with individual roles, but then a functional business oversight where they're trying to maximize the resources across projects and deploy in the most efficient manner. And you need to look at that from both angles and make sure that your transparency that you're offering the teams is focused in supporting those different roles and different angle. So we learned from successful implementation of the end-to-end technology that you need a broader focus, that the focus needs to not just be on the technology, but also the people, the process, and the organization behind the data. That needs to not just be within your organization, in our instance, our CRO, but also the processes and interactions we have outside the organization, whether that's with vendors or whether that's with partner companies. Are we connecting and driving efficiency through all of those interactions, not just the internal process? In order to be successful in that, you need to be able to align those organizations. That takes some relationship, that takes some communication and some advocacy, and also some escalation pathways that allow you to be successful. And within PPD, we have some great success, some very tangible results. Our most prominent has been on a study startup phase. That's obviously where the technologies we see the returns in the shortest period of time. From a new focus on transparency of data, from changing the structure of our organization, pulling together disparate functions into one focused site intelligence and activation group, from providing that group with workflows that are supported by transparent dashboards into the data that's accumulating on their trial real time, we've been able to show a 25% decrease in the average cycle time for sites being activated across our trials. And that's on a significant number of trials and significant number of sites. The key reasons for that type of tangible result has been the real-time delivery and access to the data. So that's allowed the workflow and the individuals to progress quickly. It's allowed the team to connect in an oversight fashion and to make sure they're looking at one central source of data. They're not trying to interrogate different perspectives. We have one source of the truth. And that's really allowed us to not only enhance our risk assessment capabilities, where we're able to spot where the challenges lie and deploy resources to resolve that, but also opportunities where we see successes coming in the trials, where we're delivering ahead and how can we benefit from that. And obviously, if you think about that data point and the reduction in cycle time to site activations, that brings not only a time and cost reduction for us, but also sets us up extremely well for patient enrollment. A lot of our focus within PPD on the use of focused transparency was very much on our internal organization, but we did have some case studies that were involving partners as well. And given the audience, I wanted to spend a little bit of time giving you a few examples of those types of case studies. The first one is a small biotech company with a very focused need for transparency around patient safety data. Due to some volatility in their pipeline, they ended up with a singular focus on an asset that we were managing. 2 phase 3 trials, very well established, confidence about the efficacy profile, and enrollment's going very well. The 2 trials are coming together with a rapid progression towards NDA submission. The only concern the customer had was there any unexpected safety concerns? We'd moved into phase 3 very quickly. And if so, was there any analysis or additional activity that we required that might delay the submission? So we committed to a day-to-day review of that data. The customer was keeping the medical monitoring close to their heart and had dedicated resources to thrive on that analysis of that data. We provided it in traditional fashion of line listings, and their paramedic was looking at that on a daily basis. With our development of our Preclaris solution that allows the transparency into the patient data in an interactive dashboard fashion, we had an asset that we wanted to bring to this organization. We recognized a recent interaction with that medic where, upon reviewing some new serious adverse event data, they had recognized a trend of concern and had made a request through to our team for an additional listing of some lab data. And the way that the communication was working, it went through the project manager to the data management, and we got the programming and stats group together to work on that listing, make sure it was specified, got it back to the customer. Sure enough, it showed elevated labs in the way the medic was concerned. But what I also noticed was that the elevated labs were not just on study, but it also existed pre-treatment. So another request came back for a medical history listing, and we were able to provide that and address this question that the medical history showed a pre-existing condition that was explaining some of the elevated labs and probably the serious adverse event, and allowed the medic to take forward with his thought process in that regard. So we went to him and said, if you can transport yourself back in time to that discussion, we're going to give you our patient data dashboard. It's got a transparent view into that data, and take some time and tell us if you can answer your own question without the support that we'd been providing you. And within 5 minutes, he phoned back and said I was able to trace it through, select those patients, find that lab data connected with the adverse events, and recognized I had a subgroup. What was really important for that customer was, because that was real time and we were ongoing in the trials, we were able to add some additional subgroup analysis to the integrated safety summary. We were able to have that programming put in place ahead of the deliverables for the individual studies. There was no time lag post-lock in terms of analysis, and we were able to move to that delivery of the NDA ahead of schedule. The next customer case study that I want to talk to you about that involved a partner was a large pharma who was looking at a growing pipeline, but a commitment to a fixed headcount. So they had developed a strategy where they wanted to essentially achieve more with less. They wanted to decrease the number of touch points between the sponsor and the CRO and focus that interaction purely on an individual whose primary focus was on the quality of the data that we were accumulating on the trial. Their view was that they had selected a reliable partner, we had convinced them on all of our capabilities. They just wanted to know that at the end of the day, the data that would form part of the trial results and ultimately the submission package was of the quality they needed. So we were able to use the technology we'd invested in to look at the dashboards, the analytics that our data management group use to interrogate those trials and make sure that we're making all the right progress on data currency and cleanliness. We were able to subset it on a hierarchy. So at the top level, there was a big picture at the portfolio level and the projects about the metrics that were showing the progress towards current and clean data. And below that, we had the analytics and the transparency that our team used within PPD's data management to really interrogate and push that project forward. The view from that model was that the sponsor would try and hover at the higher level and only if necessary move down into the second level. And that was where we were very successful in helping them with that reduced engagement model, that focus on quality, and the transparency provided the extra confidence that their partner was moving in the right direction. The third case is another large global pharma whose acquisitions, who had been busy in the acquisition space and needed to consolidate and standardize their efforts, disparate efforts in managing multiple CROs. They wanted to do so with an energy and a speed that could only be achieved if they engaged with the right CRO partners and really took advantage of what had been built and what was efficient and supportive of the CRO's best practice. So their client not only needed a CRO partner that could take on a large book of business, but also could provide some level of focused transparency that would allow that confidence that the progress on all elements of the trial across the functions was being made with the right pace and the right interrogation from PPD. Again, we looked at what we'd already built to supplement our internal processes and were able to, again, provide a higher level, big picture review that we standardize across the book of business and allowed to support the transition that was going on, the change initiative that was going on within that organization. So these are case studies that are showing the value of focused transparency in our traditional methods of delivering clinical trials. However, it's also proven to be a very important platform for the recent innovations we see influencing more and more the types of clinical development that we think we'll see going forward. So 3 examples here: risk-based monitoring, adaptive trial designs and collaborative trials. I think they will all be mentioned at various other parts of the conference. Risk-based monitoring requires a platform of real-time data if you're going to interact with that data and adapt your monitoring techniques based on the intelligence, the quality of the data you're seeing so far. Adaptive trial designs rely on fast and clear decision-making, on interim analysis that relies on us focusing our attention on cleaning and analysing key endpoints to support that decision-making. And collaborative trials, where many assets across different sponsors are considered together in a shared protocol that provides some advantage to the industry in terms of progressing phase 2 evaluations and ensuring selectiveness in what goes into phase 3, are also gaining popularity. The concepts within that type of, the implementation of that type of trial are the need to use data standards across all the arms, the ability to have a centralized data repository that's managed by an independent company, either a CRO or an academic institution, and that focused transparency is available so that different sponsors can see their different data accumulating with the different firewalls. So those concepts are very much aligned with the principle of focused transparency that I'm trying to encourage you to think about. That's also the case when you think about the technology in a collaborative trial that might have a response adaptive randomization, where you need to integrate the different data sources that shows the evaluation of the endpoint, that interacts with the randomization schedule, that interacts with the supplies management. So again, transformation of clinical development that I think is already ongoing based on focused transparency. So we have good data solutions that provide scalable levels of data transparency in our current state. We're using it in new ways to help shape the future of the industry. But where are we heading next? And again, sort of re-emphasizing some elements from the panel discussion this morning. Firstly, as I said, we're in a society and an industry that's going to see the invasion of a focus on mobile technologies. Significant investments are going on within the technology space to develop even more convenient ways for health-related data to be measured unobtrusively from patients in their daily life or at their home. That provides us from new data sources that we could access in real time. And not only are those investments creating devices that tell us about the patient's condition and their lifestyle, but also technologies are becoming viable that will tell us about their adherence with the treatment regimen, that will give us another real-time ability to analyze, see transparency on the progress of the trial with compliance. Those type of data, the technologies are all in place for that type of data to be handled, transmitted by hubs or smartphones via apps. We see that in the consumer space. We've seen it being developed with specific focus on our space. In addition to electronic consent, e-source, EMRs, a lot of the other innovations that we think will influence the industry going forward, you can see us progressing towards that virtual trial future that our colleagues at Pfizer boldly piloted a few years ago. With that type of investment from technology vendors to create patient-centric life science data hubs in the cloud that meet all the expectations of our regulators, we can see that not only the opportunity for clinical data to be acquired in a trial, aggregated and analysed versus via the routes that I've already spoke about, but you also see the opportunity for study designs, inclusion and exclusion criteria, patient recruitment, all to be influenced or supported by either the databases or the ways that consumers react to that database or interact with that database, or the social networks and social medias that they participate in as an individual or as part of a patient network. So I believe the future's coming very quickly in drug development and technology, and we've been paving the way for that with innovations that continue to allow us to drive faster and more informed clinical decisions through what I've christened focused transparency. And with that strong core capability, project teams, companies should be well placed to bolt on new methods, new technologies for acquiring, aggregating and analysing data and deploying them into a data-driven project planning and project execution mode.